Good morning, and thank you for joining the California ISO's media briefing. Elliot Mainzer, ISO's President and CEO, will be providing an update on the grid conditions with support from Mark Rothledder, who is ISO's Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. This call is being recorded, and the video file will be posted on the news page on ISO's website shortly after this event. There will be an opportunity for members of the media to ask questions after the update. I will provide instructions for how to raise your hand at that time. After your line is open, please start by introducing yourself by name and affiliation. Please try and be brief so that Mr. Mainzer and Mr. Rothledder have time to address as many questions as they can within the time allotted for this event. With that, I'll now turn the meeting over to Elliot Mainzer. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and hello everyone. This is Elliot, and thank you for joining us for this update. I'm going to just provide a quick review of yesterday. But honestly, I think our attention is already very, very focused on today because we've got another challenging set of conditions ahead for us today. But yesterday was certainly just an extraordinarily challenging day for the California grid and, in fact, for the broader Western interconnection. We started the day with a forecast for peak demand yesterday at 51,146, and by the end of the day, we had set the all-time record for the California grid at 52,061 megawatts. It was actually the all-time peak demand for the Western interconnection yesterday at 165 gigawatts. So this was a very, very extraordinarily difficult day for the grid. I wanted just to take you through a couple of the key events just to make sure everybody has a clear understanding of the sequence. As I mentioned, we started the morning with a very, very high record-setting forecast. By the early afternoon, it was becoming very clear that energy supplies were going to be extremely stressed for the afternoon. We already had a flex alert in place for the 4 to 9 p.m. and an EE1 in place for the evening. By about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we declared an EEA2 alert that would start at 4 o'clock, meaning that we were expecting that we would be starting to run out of electricity supplies at that point. And in fact, at 4 o'clock, we did go into the EEA2. And during that hour, we had access to a significant amount of basically pre-established demand response and backup generator capability that's been established through the state of California with our utility partners, particularly over the last couple of years since August of 2020. And we also were counting on customer response to our flex alert. I will mention that as we got in those conditions, we were certainly fortunate as we struggled that to also have the significant amount of new resources that have been brought online in California in the last couple of years, right? We've had about 8,000 megawatts of new generation brought online. That's about 4,000 megawatts of firm capacity, including over 3,500 megawatts of 4-hour batteries. They certainly helped, but with the type of temperatures that we had on the grid yesterday, we were in significant stress. As we got to the top of the hour, right before about 5 o'clock, load peaked for the day at 52,061 megawatts, the all-time record for the California ISO's grid. And about 15 minutes later, as load continued to grow or stay at very, very, very high levels, as load continued to stay at very, very high levels, and we started to see the solar energy ramping off and really going into the heart of the stressed grid conditions, we decided at 5:17 p.m. to trigger an EEA3 emergency. I want to be very clear about this point, and I think it's important for all of us to understand this, is that when we triggered the EEA3, our first guidance to the utilities throughout California was that we asked them to arm their firm load. What that means is that they should get ready to be prepared to trigger rotating outages. But that very, very first stage is not actually a signal to trigger outages, but to be prepared to arm firm load. If we had gone further and further in, we would have sent out a supplemental message asking them to actually trigger the rotating outages. We did not get there. Over the course of the next half hour, as we still were in the energy emergency 3, conditions continued to deteriorate as we went further and further into the EEA3 and armed load. At approximately 5:45 p.m., given that we were in significantly stressed grid conditions, Governor Newsom decided to trigger the wireless emergency alert system, which sent out a text message to people across the state of California. And within moments, we saw a significant amount of load reduction showing up to the tune of approximately 2,000 megawatts over the next 20 to 30 minutes. That significant response from California consumers to the wireless emergency alert allowed us to restore our operating reserves and took us back from the edge of broader grid disturbance. As a result, we stayed in the first phase of the EEA3 and did not have to trigger rotating outages last night. Over the course of the next hour, conditions continued to slowly improve, and by about 8 p.m., we were able to move out of the EEA3. We moved back into EEA2. Conditions were still stressed, but then, of course, across the rest of the night, as the solar energy resources fully ramped out, the batteries performed in an outstanding fashion, and the other resources kept us through. We were able to re-normalize normal conditions. So it was an extraordinary day, incredible stress. I want to just briefly thank the Californians across the state who stepped up to provide that demand response and flex their demand. Industrial and commercial business customers across California provided meaningful relief when we were in the middle of the EEA2, and we really appreciate the energy assistance provided by other utilities inside California and across the West as we all work together, quite frankly, across the Western interconnection last night to maintain reliability across the entire Western grid. So it was an extraordinary night. We finished up at the end of the day and then immediately turned our attention to today, because we're now sitting here this morning at about 10 Pacific time looking at another very challenging day. The forecast for today's gross peak, again, is similar to what we saw yesterday at 51,243 megawatts. That's the gross peak number. I think we've all learned now that it's actually the period after sunset, really between sort of 6 to 7 p.m., that is the point of maximum strain on the grid, and that's why we declare our flex alerts from 4 to 9 to give us a little buffer and for consumers to really take those actions during that entire period that can take stress off the grid and allow us to be able to minimize disruptions and also to ride through the types of contingencies that happen. You know, we have been running our natural gas fleet and our other resources and our distribution systems at very, very high levels of intensity with record-setting heat. All of this infrastructure is stressed, and so that consumer conservation provides an added layer of buffer that helps us really ride through the different types of events on the grid and minimize the probability of broader rotating outages. And we're going to need the exact same type of response tonight. So as we already are preparing for this evening, the 4 to 9 p.m. time period will again be the time when we really need consumers to provide the kind of response. We want that response as preemptively as we possibly can, and we're going to continue to push these messages out through a variety of media channels, through our website, with the entire state apparatus in California, the governor's office, the Office of Emergency Services, all of our partner utilities across California. It is truly a remarkable mobilization to help us maintain reliability, and we're appreciative of everybody's help. We've got to keep our head down and work through another night tonight to maintain grid reliability. So I'm going to stop there. Happy to take any questions that you might have. I'll just mention, we've certainly appreciated the efforts of our partners in the media to help get our message out. It's made a big difference. I think the coverage has generally been extremely constructive and helpful. Just last night, we were watching the news stations and everybody really putting out good information. So I'm going to thank you for that, and hopefully we can extend that partnership in tonight as well. Thank you.
If you're connected to the computer audio or use the Call Me feature in WebEx, You may enter the question queue by using the WebEx raise hand icon located just above the chat panel. You will hear a beep tone when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name, affiliation, and question. If you're just on the phone line and not using the WebEx audio, please dial #2 on your phone to enter the question queue. You'll hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name, affiliation, and question. I do see a few callers in the queue, both on WebEx and on the phone line. Moving on to the first caller. Please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Oh, hi. This is Paul Rogers with the San Jose Mercury News. Thanks for doing this. Two quick questions. Can you explain a little bit about the text message that went out? You mentioned from OES, how many people that went to, and if that's something you might be using again tonight. And then the second part is, as you probably saw, there were some municipal utilities, Palo Alto Municipal Utility, Alameda, who actually did have some brief rotating blackouts that they said on their social media was at the order of ISO. And they also said ISO told them it was okay to turn it back on. So how does that square with ISO saying it did not order any rotating outages? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'll answer. Actually, I'm going to answer the second question because that is certainly concerning to me first. So I have had a chance this morning to touch base with the utility operator that you're describing, the Northern California Power Agency, and there was apparently some level of confusion between our dispatchers and their dispatchers about what was being requested. I don't know exactly yet what happened. But certainly our intent, and I think our direct request, was for arming of firm load, as we conveyed to all the other utilities in California at that time. We had not progressed to rotating outages. And so I don't know, honestly, this morning exactly what happened there, but we will be in touch, and certainly we're going to be doubling down our communication with the utility to make sure that there is not a problem like that going forward. These are situations that obviously happen very infrequently, and there was a lot happening on the grid for everybody last night, and so we'll double down on the communication, make sure that doesn't happen again. With respect to the wireless emergency alert, I don't know the total number of people that went out to, but it's in the millions for certain. But I do know that it had a significant impact and demonstrates the capacity of Californians to respond and flex their demand when they really appreciate the severity of the issue. I will say that is an extraordinary tool, typically limited for situations of really almost dire circumstance. I know that it was really something that took a lot of thought and careful preparation to use. Our goal tonight is, I think we need to be very careful not to just think that we can depend on that sort of a tool. We need to see the response earlier and harder, and I think hopefully now folks recognize that when we tell them that we are dealing with a potential grid emergency, that we need their tangible action and we need their response. And so our hope this evening is that we'll see earlier and more durable load reductions from business and consumers across California. We're not, when we talk about turning up thermostats to 78 degrees, pre-cooling homes, turning off unnecessary appliances, we're not asking folks to completely turn their entire lives off, right? We're at, 10, 15, 20, 25% reductions in electricity consumption. It can be the difference between, reliability or rotating outages. And, we do not like to have to be asking for this, but this heat wave is extraordinary. It's a record-setting heat wave. These are record-setting demands on the California grid, well outside of the planning standards, and so these are extraordinary times. And over the course of the coming years, California will continue to bring on significant amounts of additional capacity to build additional margin, and we'll see additional technological advances and sophistication in the flexible demand capabilities in the state. But we are where we are, and these are times when we really need folks to lean in and assist to help us maintain overall grid reliability.
Okay, moving on to the next caller. Please go ahead. Your line is unmuted. Caller, your line has been unmuted. Please make sure to unmute it from your end and proceed. Elliot, do you want me to call me their name?
I don't know what's happening, but do you want to try another person? Maybe they can find out if can you rotate through the next person?
Okay, sure. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hey, thanks. Paul actually asked my question about the local outages. So I just want to be clear, though, Elliot. You're saying the state did not ask local utilities to turn off the power.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you please mention your affiliation and your name?
Yes, sorry. Jeremy White with Politico. Just confirming your answer to Paul that those local shutoffs were not something ordered by the state, but sounds like you're saying a miscommunication or a mistake.
Yes, and let's be really clear. First of all, they're not ordered by the state. All of the directives for the EEAs are issued by the California Independent System Operator. They're issued by us, by our control center. And yes, I'm saying that the messages that were sent out to all of the different load-serving entities in our balancing authority were to arm firm load, not to get ready for rotating outages, but we did not actually end up needing or requesting rotating outages. Okay, so there was clearly between this one entity some miscommunication, and as I said, we're circling back and certainly regret any outages and any impacts on consumers there. But we've already circled back and making sure that our teams are talking so that there won't be any type of miscommunication again going into this evening.
Got it. Thank you.
Moving on to the next caller, please go. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Before we go to the next question, I just want to mention one other thing. I think it's important to note, just since we're all learning about the grid in ways that we don't have to typically think about it, it's very important to know that when we start out, we request the utilities to arm their firm load. That's the first step. It's truly the get ready. We then watch the system conditions very, very carefully. And if it's looking as though things are going to further deteriorate, we then issue a separate order. It's known as an EEA3 load shed. And it's a separate order, and under the EEA3 load shed, the utilities are then directed to shed load, and the utilities themselves administer the load shed. They have set up plans in advance about which circuits and how to try to rotate those outages across their customers with minimum disruption and to try to do them as effectively. And of course, we're all trying to minimize the duration and length and severity as possible. And the utilities themselves at that point are also responsible for any communication with their customers about, first of all, notifying them that it is possible or likely that we're going to have rotating outages. And then once they have been triggered, also communicating with customers. So we provide the bulk grid information, and then they administer it locally with their retail. The utilities administer it locally with their retail customers.
Okay, moving on to the next caller. Please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi there. This is Madison Hernizen, a California reporter with the Center Square. Thank you for taking our questions. I had a question pertaining to some other states. So I'm curious, has this heat event triggered the policy about wheel-through energy prioritization behind native demand, specifically Arizona, Nevada, or Oregon-based wheel-through purchases?
I would say that wouldn't say it's triggered the policy. I would say that, we have been able to adhere to our policy through this event, and we were able to, last night, honor those transfers to those other utilities who rely on them to get them through the very challenging grid conditions, just like we were relying on our own imports from out of state last night.
All right, thank you.
Moving on to the next caller. Please go ahead, your line is unmuted.
Hey, Sammy Roth here. Sammy Roth here from the LA Times. So just, I guess following up on Paul's question from earlier about the text from the governor, the Cal OES text and flex alerts, I guess it kind of seems like there's been diminishing returns a bit with flex alerts. Like the more you ask people to do this, the harder it is maybe to get the message through that this is really urgent. And there's been a lot more of these the last few years. And then, you send out this special text message and that gets a big response. I guess I'm curious, Elliot, what your thoughts are on the future of the Flex Alert program and just sort of like how you move forward continuing to communicate that this is urgent and getting people to respond when you need it, how long we can keep doing that and how you do it.
Yeah, thanks. Right now, what I'm going to say is the Flex Alert and the response from 4 to 9 p.m. it's essential. And, where we get to, in the future, fair question, Sammy, but right now, the Flex Alert and that conservation and the other tools that we've lined up in EEA2 they're essential. They're the difference makers. That flexible demand is absolutely key to helping us maintain. You saw it last night. It took a very loud signal to get it, but Californians demonstrated their capacity to do it. Okay, and I think they now recognize we're not messing around. Okay, this is a real issue, and we need real response. And so we'll have a chance once we get through this event. We'll have a chance to kind of take a look at the future of flex demand and the future of flex alerts. But and your point is right that there may be some level. It's been going. This is an extremely prolonged event, and we've been asking folks every day. But right now we're hopefully 2 days away from the end of the heat wave, and we need folks to run through the tape and give us everything they got tonight and likely tomorrow as well.
One other question, if I could ask one more. Just talking about the conditions on the larger WEC. I think you mentioned 165 gigawatts of peak demand record.
Yeah.
Could you just talk a little bit about what conditions have been like on the larger system and what your communications have been like with other balancing authorities and how that plays into balancing supply and demand this week?
Yeah, it's we've been in. So this particular heat event was in some ways the only part of the West that really wasn't hit with very, very, very really extreme, in some cases record-setting temperatures was the Pacific Northwest. I think we saw record temperatures yesterday in Salt Lake City. I think in Denver. I think in Boise maybe. I'll have to double check. But there were plenty of other cities in the West. There were other utilities who were in significant distress, and we were in constant communication with each other. We all work together across the western United States to maintain the reliability of the western interconnection, and we all depend on each other to one degree to another. And we all, we cycle through these periods. There are times, and there's been times earlier this summer when other regions have gotten themselves into tough conditions, and we've been okay and had a chance to send surplus energy to them. And then these last couple of days, California and Nevada also have been really, really hit with this heat wave. And so yesterday we were in regular touch with leadership of utilities from across the West. Our Western Energy Imbalance Market performed extremely well last night, bringing energy not only into California, but to other entities in the West who are in distressed conditions, showing just the value of that wide area coordination across the West. And at the end of the day, we were all able to work together to maintain the reliability of the interconnection. So it was a night where... Were
you getting a lot of hydro from the Pacific Northwest? You said they were in distress.
Yeah, we certainly have we've had strong imports from the Pacific Northwest, for sure. And that also, I want to emphasize, California, has been, I mentioned California has put 8,000 megawatts of new clean energy resources on its grid in just the last 2 years, since July of 2020. And those resources perform very well, including, I think, we have the largest concentration of 4-hour lithium-ion batteries of any place in the world. And last couple nights, those batteries were performing at over 3,000 megawatts of generation and putting energy right into the system right when we needed it. And so the energy storage is also really proving its value. And that's going to be a big part of the story going forward as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next caller. Please go ahead, the line is unmuted.
Hello, this is Kate Winston from S&P Global Commodity Insights. Thanks for taking my question. I'm wondering what steps has the ISO taken since the 2020 outages, and what additional steps are needed going forward so the ISO doesn't need to lean so heavily on consumers to reduce their demand, considering that extreme weather events like this are becoming increasingly the norm?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. It's a good question. I would say, first of all, in terms of actions we've taken, first and foremost, I would say, we've been very clear about our concerns about resource adequacy in California, and making sure that it's clearly understood that the state and the utilities need to continue bringing new capacity online to support reliability. And I think the state has been responding. As I mentioned, a significant amount of procurement of new resources, and of course, and that's been a big important part of our ability to ride through the last couple of days. I would say that we have also been working very diligently on transmission planning and making sure that we have the transmission capacity in the ground to bring these new resources online, and also making sure that our energy market is operating as efficiently as possible. I would say probably first and foremost, maybe what's been making the most difference is we've really focused on enhanced communication. Our ability to kind of get ahead of these events, to be able to look out several days to make sure that everyone from the governor's office to the legislature to the utilities to consumers to our partners in adjacent states knows when we're heading into a distressed event, allows us really to plan and mobilize resources in advance. I've just been deeply appreciative of the level of mobilization across California. Very strong leadership from the governor's office, very strong leadership in the utility community, just tremendous organization, and that communication has been critical. The other thing that's happened is that the California Public Utilities Commission, the California Energy Commission have worked tirelessly to bring additional demand response and backup generation resources on board to help us if we get into emergency conditions. Those resources played a big role yesterday in helping us stabilize and helping us ride through. We are dealing with events right now that are truly record-setting, and they're establishing new benchmarks. So one of our challenges going forward is to try to understand, what are we learning about the way that the climate is increasing the likelihood and the duration of heat events like we're dealing with right now. How will loads behave, and beginning to plan for this type of volatility. We've already started that, but here's just another example that we're on the right track to continue ramping up our resource adequacy planning and bringing new resources online. So I think we're also going to learn a lot about the capability of California consumers to provide flexible demand, but to try to bring more rigor, more automation, and to really make sure that we're aligning price signals with the need for demand response. And as a matter of fact, just right now, the California Public Utilities Commission is actively signing up new customers into these type of programs, and we're hoping that over time we'll have much more rigorous and deep participation of California customers in these compensated DR programs. So I'll stop there with that, but plenty going on. But certainly I think the communication coordination, the advance notice, the ability to kind of get ahead of these events, I think has been a real difference maker this time.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to the next caller. Please go ahead, your line is unmuted.
Yeah, hi, this is Brian Melly with the Associated Press. How many customers lost power because of that confusion in Northern California where the operators shut down or instituted rolling blackouts? And also, what are the imports looking like for today as the heat continues in California? What's the forecast around the West, and how will that impact energy imports?
I do not know the number of customers. I'm asking Mark. He thinks it might have been between 6,000. Sorry. Excuse me. Sorry. I do not know the number of customers. That's a different number, by the way. I do not know the number of customers that were impacted. I believe the intended instruction there was to arm something around 45 megawatts of load, and I do not know at this stage how the utilities implemented that. But it was, and again, look, we take every outage of a customer very, very seriously. We never want to see that, but I think it's in that order. And of course, the system was operating at 52,000 megawatts last night. So I'm sure that the local utility will continue to communicate and handle any questions about that. For last night, in terms of imports, imports were ranging between 6,000 and 8,000 megawatts across the course of the event. And so very strong imports, and we likely were hoping to see something equivalent to that today.
How many customers are affected if 45 megawatts was removed? What would
I'm not going to. We'd be happy to follow up with you. I literally don't know the composition of the system. I don't know their density. I don't know their customer type. I can't speculate on their system. I just don't have information at this point. I just know that what we're going to be doing here, we're trying to convey, we're always working to convey the most accurate information. And certainly, as I mentioned last night, we did not need, nor was it our intention to signal the need for rotating outages. But we'll work with them to make sure that there's no miscommunication at all tonight, and they know exactly what, when we send them an arm load order, exactly what that means.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next caller. Please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, good morning. This is Michelle Bandor from KCRA in Sacramento. Thank you so much for taking all of our questions. Not to kind of keep repeating the questions that other reporters have asked about the confusion, but do you know which cities were infected? I know that we had mentioned Palo Alto and Alameda, and we had received something from Lodi. Do you know how many communities were affected and which ones?
I believe there were 5 communities that were affected, but honestly, and I believe Healdsburg, I do not, you guys, I'm going to just tell you that I've come in this morning, I'm just getting information on this to really understand it. I don't, just have my first conversation. What we will do is my team will follow up with you and make sure we will try to get some additional information. I think the best thing to do, honestly, though, is to focus questions to the Northern California Power Agency, NCPA. I believe that they can give you, that they will know exactly what happened on their system and who was impacted. They're the retail provider there, or they're the combination of both with the retail providers that can give you the best information of what happened there. I just don't have great visibility into that here operating the bulk grid.
No, okay, thank you. No, we appreciate that. Yeah, I know we all would like a follow-up to answer these questions. While I still have you, do you know if you will be issuing another one of the text alerts today, or is that kind of one of those last-minute decisions when you see how much load is being used?
Yeah, I mean, our absolute intent is not to have to do that again tonight. We're really hoping.
Okay.
I'm going to say we're expecting. Customers, Californians saw last night how significant this issue is. So our plan is to ensure that as the Flex Alert really kicks in between 4 to 9 p.m., the folks recognize it under similar conditions. Whatever they did last night worked real well. Do it again and maybe do it a little harder, and that will help out. But I know that truly is a tool of absolute last resort.
And then just one last question, I'm sorry. You had mentioned the 165 megawatts. What's the number that starts the rotating brownouts and blackouts? We had hit 165 as a record, but what is that number that you hope not to reach?
Okay, let's make sure. So fair question I'm giving you. So the 165 was a number that represented the 160 gigawatts or 165,000 megawatts.
Oh.
Was a number that represented the entire demand for electricity across the Western interconnection. Okay, I was just trying to give you guys a sense of how widespread this challenge was last night for the Western grid as a whole, not just California. And there is no specific megawatt number that you hit. It's always very situational. But what you're looking for, the trigger point for the first stage of an EEA3, when we typically arm firm load but do not request rotating outages, is when we are now literally running out of energy supplies and all we have left is our operating reserves that we carry all the time for typical contingencies. Okay, like things like transmission lines tripping and power plants going offline. Okay, when all you have left is your operating reserves, that is when you trigger an EEA3. By arming firm load, you then are basically prepared to trigger rotating outages if your operating reserves get fully depleted. But it's really the trigger for an EEA3 is when all you have left is your operating reserves. Fortunately, last night, especially after the significant response to the WEA, we were able to restore our operating reserves, and over the course of the rest of the evening, through a variety of tools, able to ride out the balance of the event. But like I said, that's really there is no single number. It's a condition, and it's very situational.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next caller. Please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, it's Dale Kessler from the Sacramento Bee. Can you, two things, can you quantify just how close you came to actually have to order rotating blackouts? You know, how many megawatts, how close did you get?
You know, Dale, I don't have we put it this way. We were in, if you want to think about it, I'm not going to go into a bunch of numbers because they're still being processed. Bottom line, think about it, we were well into the reserve tank of the car. Think about it that way, okay? We were down to the last gallon there and dipping into our operating reserves. And we typically carry, you know, somewhere in the area of 3,000 to 4,000 megawatts of operating reserves. So we were very, very close to the bottom. And that's why we were in the EEA3. That's why load was armed, and that's why we were watching the system extraordinarily carefully in that condition.
Okay, thanks. When you referenced, we were talking about the communication snafu, and you said 45 megawatts. Was that how much load was shed by those NCPA utilities, or is that what they were told to? What was the phrase? The arm. You know, prepare the preparation.
Yeah, again, I want to be 100% clear. What we last night, our system operators never determined that we needed rotating outages. We were able to make it through this event without calling for rotating outages. So the communication, our intent was last night was to communicate to them, as we did to the other utilities across California, to arm. I think the intent was to arm 45 megawatts. Exactly how they implemented that, I still don't know. It's not visible to me yet. But the intent was arming of 45 megawatts, right in that ball.
Is it possible, and I know this is kind of speculative, is it possible that this communications screw up actually is what kept the rest of the grid afloat?
Absolutely not.
Okay. So the amount of
yeah.
So whatever they took off the grid was not enough to make the difference.
Yeah, certainly. Look at that particular those customers. Look, we all here work our hearts out to make sure we don't have outages of service. So we're certainly sad to hear that happened. And like I said, it's already in process of making sure that the control center operators there have full understanding, and there's no communication on our side of that. But we needed, the kind of response we got from the WEA and over 2,000 megawatts to really get us out of trouble. So no, that was definitely not. It was, again, it was part of we'll put it this way: when you're in that condition, every megawatt counts. Okay, and that's why we ask consumers to just lean in and make those changes. You get enough people making those modest changes in their behavior, that helps. And unfortunately, those consumers were impacted more severely. But we needed, in the thousands of megawatts at that point to get ourselves out of EEA3, and that's what we got from the WEA, and any subsequent demand response that materialized across the course of that emergency.
Okay, moving on to the next caller. Please go ahead, the line is unmuted.
Hi, Dan Brecky from KQED. Just a couple of things. The past couple of days, there have been transmission emergencies declared for some overload issues near Palermo or the Palermo area. Can you go into what those issues were and what exactly, because this is a question that comes up in the office, what is a transmission emergency?
Sure, and I'm gonna let Mark, who is more intimately involved with those specific events, Mark Rotsleader, our COO, explain what was happening with those particular events.
Yeah. So those transmission emergencies, and specifically the Palermo situation, is a very localized overload situation that needed to be managed, and it was managed. We actually used the state emergency backup or emergency generator that was installed last year to help relieve that constraint. It did not have an impact on the bulk system at that point. It was a very localized flow issue.
Okay, and then here's another. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
The definition of a transmission emergency.
Yeah, the transmission emergency means that you are having issues maintaining flows below normal ratings or emergency ratings in case of a contingency event, loss of a parallel line. And the bottom line is transmission emergency is different from a system emergency in the sense that it's just saying an area, Northern California, is experiencing this transmission emergency, and oftentimes that transmission emergency is a much more even localized situation than just Northern California, as was the case in Palermo. It's a very localized situation. Yep.
Okay. And then I just wanted to follow up. I mean, we've been having this incredible historic heat wave, and that's hard on the transmission system, just the heat. How's the transmission system been standing up, and are there any particular areas of concern?
Yeah, the transmission system has been holding up very well. And I will mention also we have been fortunate that the many fires that are burning inside California at the moment have had very limited impacts on the bulk electrical system. There have been some lower voltage impacts up in Northern California with the fire burning up in Siskiyou County, but nothing that's had a significant disturbance for the bulk grid. Just deep appreciation to the Office of Emergency Services and CAL FIRE. They've done just a remarkable job staging fire crews across California and, of course, dealing with this very, very unfortunate kind of heart-wrenching situation up in Siskiyou County. But generally, we've been blessed that the fires have not had negative impacts. I will knock wood. That's one of the big contingencies that we face as a grid operator, and honestly, it's another reason why that consumer conservation is so important, to give us some margin against those types of contingencies, especially as we get another day into this historic heat wave.
Moving on to the next caller. Please go ahead, the line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Ann Mulkern with Environment and Energy News. Can you give us a description of what made the difference this time versus 2020? And I'm wondering how specific you can be in terms of what type of supply was on the system now versus 2 years ago. Was it just the battery storage, or were there other things? And how much did you have to rely on the natural gas plants? If you can just help us out with what exactly made the difference this year versus 2 years ago.
Thank you for the question. It was, as I mentioned, it was sort of this combination of hard assets and soft assets. Okay, from an asset perspective, I mentioned that the state has procured about 8,000 megawatts of new clean energy resources, a significant amount of bulk grid, solar energy in particular, some wind energy. There has been continued installations, and the batteries really have been just extremely valuable to the system. As I mentioned, we have now about 3,500 megawatts of batteries on our grid. Today we are at 200 megawatts factoring the rotating outages in 2020. Okay, massive increase in energy storage, and we're going to continue that trend in the years ahead to continue building out both the 4-hour lithium-ion batteries and longer duration storage as that comes onto the grid. Many consumers have continued to add rooftop solar, which has been a contributor. And as I mentioned, some of those sort of emergency resources, the demand response capability and the backup utility generators that are available under those extreme conditions that the California Energy Commission and the California Public Utilities Commission have helped pull together, made a real difference when we went into the EEA2 stage last night at 4 p.m. I would say that sort of tying it all together, and I think that what's been such a difference maker this time as well, in August of 2020, that event, honestly, I guess I'd have to say it happened very quickly. I think that there was a general sense that folks were going to be okay going to that evening, and then some very quick contingencies tripped the grid into bad conditions. And so this time, we wanted to make sure that through the coordination and the advanced communication, that we really make sure that folks are on alert, they're fully prepared, they're making sure that those contingency measures are in good shape, that the communication channels across the board are strong. And I think you've seen that this year, that we've been consistently communicating every day with folks as we've worked through this event, and just like we're going to do this evening. So I think those elements have been real difference makers.
May I ask for one clarification? When you talked about the utility generators that were available under extreme conditions, the Energy Commission, CPUC control, can you tell me more about that? Was that part of the $5.2 billion that the governor wanted? And I can't recall how much actually got approved in the budget, but that to have those resources available?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So what's referred to as now officially as our strategic energy reserve or strategic reserve resources. Yes, some of those resources are dollars to continue supporting them. As you can see, we are exposed here in California and the broader West now to much more extreme weather and temperature volatility and events that can fall outside of our planning horizon. And so that funding will help in part to continue to build these strategic resources. And I would say that some of those capabilities are still being defined, trying to think about other capabilities that can be brought in for those really, really super extreme moments when we need that backup capability. And of course, it takes an emergency proclamation from the governor of California to access some of those resources. I will say that, look, some of the generation that's operating right now is not clean, and we take that very, very seriously and really try to minimize the use of those resources. But they have been helpful, and I will say the California Energy Commission and the CPUC, they line up those capabilities and try to get customers and providers enrolled. And then at the end of the day, our system operators here in Folsom dispatch those resources when they're needed under extreme conditions. Yeah.
We'll be taking one more question. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Laura Kivens from KQED. I have a few questions. One is that it's great that customers have responded so well to those text messages, and I think as we move into this future of more extreme heat waves, I think people do want to do something, and I'm curious what it is that you would say to consumers beyond, minimizing their load from 4 to 9. Is it, hey, everybody get a heat pump instead of an air conditioning unit, or what is your other message to consumers?
I think in the short term, like I said, you can tell, and thank you for the question. It's an excellent question. I think, for purposes of today, the consumers have the tools they have today, right? They have their ability to turn up their thermostat. They have the ability to shift their major appliances out of that 4 to 9 period. They have the ability to close the drapes. They can pre-cool their homes. Those are the tools that they have today, and we need them to use those tools tonight. So I just want to kind of reiterate that because we are still in the middle of this event. I think over the longer term, I think that consumers, as we develop greater understanding in society about what's happening with our weather and our climate and what's happening with our grid and our technology, I think there's a greater recognition that individuals can play a role with their individual choices, the type of appliances they choose, the way that they set up their thermostats. Just their individual choices can have a huge impact. And I think over time the challenge is quite frankly to build that into the fabric of their lives, to make things much more automated, to make things to be actually profitable for them when they elect to reduce their electricity consumption, and to get much more rigorous institutionalized demand response capabilities where when we get in a situation like this, we're not necessarily having to call for consumption, but it happens on more of an automated, sustainable basis. But that's the future. Today's today, and I think last night showed us that in general, as a community here in California, we have the capacity to rally and make a real difference, and we're just hopeful that we'll see the same level of behavior tonight, and that we'll be able to get through these last couple days of this literally record-setting heat wave without broader disturbances of electrical service. So I wanted to thank all of you guys for your time. I want to reiterate for both our local partners here in California and for many of you covering on the international scene, your coverage has been extraordinarily helpful. I think you can probably understand that last night, given everything that was going on, there were extraordinarily fluid and dynamic situation, not just here at the California ISO, but each of the individual utilities was dealing with lots of different challenges. I can tell you that many of them were dealing with overheating equipment and outages, hundreds of thousands of customers asking them questions, trying to communicate. These are, infrequent events, and certainly regrettable that we did have that one communication issue with one of our utility partners. But more broadly, when you think about the magnitude of the event, over 52,000 megawatts of load, and all of our other utilities able to successfully ride through that event with us, I think in general, honestly, I think the communication as a whole was outstanding. And I think we really appreciate that. And that's been the difference maker, and we value our partnerships with all of these utilities and their customers, and we're going to leverage that again tonight, hopefully for another reliable evening. So thanks again for your time. We really appreciate everything you're doing, and we'll certainly be keeping you posted on a regular basis.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.